Profit is found, not created. This has been a recurring theme that I've noticed when working with brands in our private program this week. We just closed up an intake for the start of spring, and during the onboarding process, this theme has been coming up where profit isn't really something that you optimistically create, but rather it's more like something you discover from looking back at the experiments and activities that you've been running to tease apart and look for where there's gems. So let's get into 3 examples of what I mean by that. And these are all based on conversations I've had this week and just been adapted so that the actual numbers aren't reflective of anyone's personal numbers. So example number 1 over here, let's say a brand spends $10,000 on ads and they make back 15K in sales. So it's a 1.5 ROAS. And in this particular case, the cost of goods is 45%, as they have a gross margin of 55%, and OPEX is assumed to be averaged out at 10% of revenue. This ends up creating a profit of minus $3,250. So we're actually not making a profit here when we're considering all the numbers. So a natural conclusion we might make with this is that this experiment isn't working. This overarching campaign isn't working. Let's move on and let's try something else. But under the concept of profit is found and not created, before we move on to something else really quickly, it's important to tease apart the aggregate to see if we can find any gems. So we put on our discovery hat and our discovery glasses and dig deeper. And we might see something like this, where in the $10,000 of ad spend, there were actually 5 tranches of spend that yielded the 15K in sales. So with the first 4 tranches, we had $2,000 spent in each tranche. And in the first one, we made back 1,000. Second one, we made back 3,000. Third one, we made back 1,000. Fourth one, we made back 2,000. So overall, in the first 4 tranches, we're in the negative all the way through. However, in the 5th tranche, there was actually some pretty nice numbers where 2,000 was spent and then 8,000 was generated, which yields a margin net of everything of about 20%, which is pretty healthy. And so if we were to only look at things in aggregate over here, where we say, oh, we spent 10K, we made back 15, we're in the whole 3,250, let's move on, we would actually be missing this important detail where we actually have something that's pretty scalable, right? And especially if this is the beginning of an experiment and we're getting strong numbers like this at 20% net of everything, it's actually pretty exciting. And so it would just be a shame to move on from something like this and leave it in the past, not take it with you into the future. The set of ads that yielded this sort of return, and rather the set of ads and landing pages in combination, could then be used as a foundation for a lot of experimentation to scale up. And what's exciting about this is that this is just a starting point. So right here, you're only spending 2K to make back 8, but maybe over time you can scale this up to spending 200,000 in ad spend, yielding something like 800,000 in sales. And this is something that I've experienced and seen many times, where you look for clues of what's working and then you dig further. All right, example number 2. We have a brand that is selling in both the UK and also in United States. And currently, they are using aggregated KPIs to monitor and manage performance, meaning they are analyzing the performance and making decisions on the performance as a whole, as opposed to separating out the geographies. But the nuance here is that in the US, their gross margin is actually 65%, and in the UK, it's 75%. So in aggregate, if they're looking at things just overall, let's say they spend $5,000 on ads, make back 10,000, and this was split across the 2 different geos, they're making about $1,000 net of everything before tax. But if we unpack things a little bit further and we tease things apart between the countries, we can actually break things down a little bit more granularly. And we can see that despite splitting the ad spend in half between the two and both making the same amount of revenue, what ends up happening is that the US is actually 3 times as profitable as the UK. And that's because of the differing unit economics between the countries, where in the US, their gross margin is 75%, and in the UK, it's 65%. So by doing this discovery and finding this information, what we're able to do is make decisions that can eventually lead to more profit. So as an example, in this case, what we might do is be a little bit more tight with the marketing efficiency that we're after in the UK. Instead of allowing ads to be 50% of revenue, maybe we have to limit it to being only 40% of revenue. Or another strategy is potentially doubling down on the United States instead, because it's already got great traction where it's making 3 times the amount of profit. So instead of splitting our ad spend between the countries 50-50, we might do 75-25. So again, it's another example of how profit is not necessarily created just out of activity, but rather it's discovered by looking at things you've already done. Okay, and then example number 3, we have a brand that has a new product they want to launch, and the cost of goods on that is $50 all in, shipped to the customer. And right now, at the time, they are thinking, hey, we want to sell it for $80 because that's what we think the market is willing to pay. And it's what we're seeing other competitors selling similar products for. So that leaves a gross profit of only $30. And when you unpack this a little more, if you assume an operating expenses of 10% of revenue, that's $8 that's gone already. And then if you assume a profit target of 10% on that 80 that you're planning to generate, you end up only with $14 left over in order to spend on ads to generate that $80 in sales. Which if we do the math on that, 80 over 14, that's a 5.7 return on ad spend that you're going to need to hit in order to hit your profit goals. Which in 2025, unless you have a very strong organic presence and a very warm source of organic traffic that's ready to buy your stuff, it's going to be pretty challenging to make that work. So by doing this discovery process, we're able to realize, hey, we might need to head back to the drawing board to see how we can engineer more margin into the offer to allow for more first order profitability that comes a little bit easier than having to hit a 5.7 return on ad spend consistently. And as a result, get ourselves out of playing a game where the odds are against our favor. So these 3 examples that I covered, which are all based on conversations that I've been having this week, show that in certain circumstances where you have things going on or you have some plans, that opportunities to have a profit left over is more so revealed to us through discovery than they are through us doing stuff necessarily. And it's more of being in the spirit of looking inwards into your business and inwards into experiments and activities you've already done rather than outwards for the answers to your profitability goals, So in these times, if you're in similar situations, it might not be another shiny tactic or object that you need. It might not be another tactic or shiny object that you need, but rather it's looking at what's in front of you to identify the best opportunities possible.